Today's video was inspired by a recent viewer comment about my video on 4 important U.S. housing market trends impacting us in 2022. The viewer felt that I relied too heavily on the supply and demand for homes in the U.S., so I felt his comment made for an excellent learning point for our viewers. In this short video, we'll review his comment and my extended response so that you can understand why it's always about supply and demand when forecasting the housing market. Again, this is going to be short and sweet, but I think it's got a great takeaway for you. Here is what our viewers shared. Joe, there's more to it than just supply and demand. Homes are not necessarily widgets in accounting and finance or a supply curve in economics. The housing market is already showing signs of softening in many parts of the country, even in some California counties. And no, it's not due to seasonality. Unlike the stock market, the forces that impact the housing market are a slow, grueling process, not an event or a headline. This could take many months or even years to play out. Well, overall, I agree. And yet I disagree too, and here's why. Let's start with a few points about the theory of supply and demand. The law of demand says that at higher prices, buyers will demand less of an economic good. The law of supply says that at higher prices, sellers will supply more of an economic good. These two laws interact to determine the actual market prices and volume of goods that are traded on a market. Several independent factors can affect the shape of the market supply and demand, influencing both the prices and quantities that we observe in the market. The housing market is no different than any other market, and it adheres to these points completely. But it is the fourth point that I think our viewer was really trying to make, in that the housing market supply and demand dynamic is influenced by multiple factors. And by the way, my channel's reach is influenced by several factors too. The more likes I get and the more subscribers I attract, the more YouTube promotes my videos. Please consider clicking the thumbs up like button and subscribing now. It will help me grow my channel and it will ensure that you get all my new content when it is fresh. I have produced hundreds of videos and thousands of articles over the years, and it is rare that I cover the market completely in any given piece. But I do cover the independent factors that affect the shape of the market, supply and demand, often and consistently. I never draw a conclusion for the market based upon just one or two factors. For example, if you saw my recent U.S. housing market forecast for 2022, I've included a link to the video above and below. Then you'll know that before I gave my forecast, I addressed such topics as population growth, mortgage interest rates, the economy, new home construction, foreclosures and forbearances, home prices, rental rates, mortgage rates versus the Fed funds rate, equity versus debt in the housing market, loan delinquencies, and inflation. These would be most of the independent factors for the U.S. housing market overall. But I think the bigger picture here is, what do you, the viewer, really want to know when you are consuming real estate market information? Do you want to become an expert, or do you want expert guidance on what to expect from the housing market? My assumption is that you prefer the former, as the latter would require much more time than our typical viewer chooses to spend. And that is why, as a real estate consumer, all you really need to do is monitor the trends in the supply and demand for homes if you really want to see the changes coming to a local market or the U.S. market overall. Most importantly, pay attention to the trend in the relative supply of homes, and you'll always be several steps ahead of the curve. Our viewer was right when he stated that the housing market is a slow, grueling process, and there is no better way to watch that process unfold than to monitor the monthly changes in the relative supply of homes. For example, let's look at the relative supply of homes for sale in Tallahassee, which is the months of supply of homes, or stated another way, the supply of homes relative to the current rate of demand. There is a lot of activity in this graph, and I'll explain it all, but the key trend it produces is shown as a gray line that tracks the non-seasonal relative supply of homes for sale in Tallahassee. For our non-Tallahassee viewers, the U.S. graph would look very similar, and so too would the majority of U.S. metropolitan areas. This graph serves to help us monitor the change in the supply and demand dynamic every month. As our viewer reminds us, it is a slow, grueling process, so observing a directional change here could very well give you more than a year's start in understanding a major market shift. Here's how the graph was assembled and how you can use it. The graph plots the number of listings each month in red and the number of homes sold each month in green, both measured on the left vertical axis. The resulting months of supply is plotted in blue and recorded on the right axis, which reveals the relative supply of homes for sale in Tallahassee. The blue lines form a wavy pattern because home sales are seasonal, but the gray line plots the one-year average of the relative supply, thus removing the seasonal impact. Currently, the non-seasonal relative supply of homes has dropped to an all-time low of 2.7 months of supply. The gold band in the graph shows where the market would be considered balanced at 6 months of supply, so you can see just how extremely undersupplied the current market has become. The gray line is heading downwards, and as a consumer, that's all you really need to know unless you want a deeper understanding of the long-term future of the housing market. This descending trend means it's harder today to find a home than it was a year ago. It also means that there is more pressure on prices to rise than there was a year ago, and that the pricing pressure in the market is likely going to push home prices higher at a faster rate than we saw last year. So if you thought last year's 11.4% appreciation rate was crazy, expect it to be higher this year. In real estate, unless you sell homes for a living, or you want your PhD, just keep up with our reports on the supply and demand for homes, and you'll be able to best prepare yourself for whatever your goals require. We publish them monthly, and we often discuss supply and demand in our weekly one-page special real estate report. I've included a link below if you would like a free subscription to our weekly special. Supply is incredibly low. Demand remains strong, though not near past market highs, so until we see some vigorous change in the independent factors that influence the supply and demand for homes, you should have a great understanding of what to expect from the housing market. Scarcity and higher home prices. Remember, it's always about supply and demand in real estate, so focus on the relative supply of homes for sale, and you'll be sufficiently informed to do very well in the housing market. If you would like to see my forecast for the U.S. housing market in 2022, you can view it by clicking on the box on the top left corner of your screen. To see my popular video featuring my top 6 home selling tips, just click on the box below it. Please remember to like this video, check out the links below it, and subscribe to our channel so that you never miss anything.